All right, welcome to connective tissue proper. We are going to be looking at the differences between loose and dense connective tissue. But before we get there, just so that we have a little bit of review, remembering that connective tissue, we have 3 different subcategories, and one of them is supporting connective tissue. A second one is fluid connective tissue. And then our third is what we're going to be focusing on for this drawing. It is connective tissue proper. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this guy. And as you can see, we're going to further split that into 2 categories, loose and dense. So let's go ahead and we'll start here on this side. And I'm going to use blue for loose connective tissue. Okay. The reason why it is given this name is because it has a loose arrangement of cells and fibers. Okay, so when we look at this box here, this is, we're gonna kind of draw an example of what it would look like underneath a microscope. So I'm gonna highlight this guy in blue just to represent loose connective tissue. Okay, and loose arrangement of cells and fibers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw several different types of fibers here, but all kind of away from each other, right? So these kind of thicker ones we use to represent collagen. I can have like a stringy type of fiber here, kind of more a stick-like type of fiber here. But we have to add our cells too, right? So these are different kinds of fibers. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take a blue and I'm just gonna make these square cells with a nucleus in the middle. Again, nothing really touching one another or too close to one another. So when it comes to loose connective tissue, we like to think it doesn't have too many fibers, so a decrease in the amount of fibers, but a lot of ground substance and cells, which is why I drew more cells. We can actually add a couple more if we wanted to, just to really send that message home. Okay. People like to think of loose connective tissue as the packaging material of the body. Okay. You're going to see that it kind of surrounds certain things, kind of keeps things protected and where they should be. So we're going to go ahead and contrast that with the other side, and we're going to look at dense connective tissue. And I'm going to go ahead and use a pink for this side. Okay, so it gets its name, if you haven't guessed yet. The loose had the loose arrangement of cells and fibers. Dense has a dense arrangement. Dense arrangement. So again, we're going to kind of draw an example here. Highlight this box in pink so we differentiate between the two. So I'm going to make quite a few fibers here. So I'm going to kind of make a few squiggly lines, a few collagen here. Some going kind of like a diagonal direction. Maybe one going up and down over here. Something like that. Okay, And then in terms of cells, I am only going to be able to squeeze just a couple in here. So I'm going to put one here, maybe one in here, one down here. So with dense connective tissue, we like to say we have an increased amount of fibers compared to a decreased amount of ground substance and cells, right? And that has to do with just how densely arranged the fibers and cells are. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room like there is in the loose. So now we're gonna go and we're gonna focus on loose connective tissue. And we're gonna go over more specific tissue types. So these are tissue types that fall into this category because they have a loose arrangement of cells and fibers. So the first specific tissue type is gonna be areolar. Okay, so for areolar connective tissue, it has a little bit of everything in terms of what types of cells and fibers. Okay, so it has a little bit of everything, and then in parentheses, we can write various cells and fibers. Okay, when you look at areolar connective tissue underneath a microscope, it's going to look web-like. So it kind of looks like a little spider web. And it is the most common type of loose connective tissue. We are going to find this type of tissue under most epithelia. So remember, we talked about epithelial tissue in our last unit. Okay, so as an example, we would see this under the epidermis. Okay, one other place we can find areolar connective tissue is that it surrounds organs and binds organs or organ systems together. Okay, so that is our first specific tissue type, areolar connective tissue. Our second type is going to be adipose tissue. Okay, adipose tissue is made up of adipocytes. So adipo refers to fat and cyte means cell. So these are fat cells. We have this tissue for cushioning and energy. So it provides cushioning and energy. Where are we going to find adipose tissue? It surrounds our organs. Right, so it gives it a nice little protective layer, but also helps insulate it, keep it nice and warm. And found under our skin as well. And that layer specifically is called the hypodermis. All right, so that is tissue type number 2. And this is our last example for loose connective tissue. Number 3 is reticular. Okay. This tissue is made up of primarily reticular fibers, so that kind of makes that nice and easy. Right, reticular fibers for the reticular tissue. Those reticular fibers form like a mesh or a framework. All right, where are we going to find this particular type of tissue? It makes up predominantly the immune or lymphatic organs. Okay, so we can give some examples of these. The spleen, if you remember, we call that the red blood cell graveyard. The liver, and lymph nodes. That's what your doctor feels in your neck if you go to the doctor's office and you're sick. They usually feel for those lymph nodes and see if they are inflamed. So because they make up predominantly our immune and lymphatic organs, we're going to find a specific cell type in reticular tissue. So we say that it houses a lot of white blood cells. And we actually shorten that and we'll write WBCs. White blood cells. So those we're going to learn a little later in the semester. Those are our immune cells. All right, so those are our three types of loose connective tissue: areolar, adipose, and reticular. So now we're going to go over to the other side and let's talk about specific tissue types for dense connective tissue. So again, our color for this is pink. Please feel free to use any color that you like though. Okay, nice thing about this, we only have two types of dense connective tissue. The first, can I kind of give myself a little bit of room here, is dense regular. Dense regular connective tissue. All right, so this type of tissue is predominantly made of collagen fibers, it's nice and strong, with fibroblasts in between. All right, so the reason why it's called regular, okay, regular means that all the fibers go in the same direction. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to draw a little example of how these fibers would be laid out. So again, we're going to stick with our collagen, which are these larger fibers that we drew up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw them all going in the same direction, kind of in little rows. So 3 there, and then right underneath it, the same thing. Okay, and then like it said before, it's got little fibroblasts in between. So that's where we're going to kind of draw our little cells, is in between these stacks of collagen. Something like that. Okay. So we kind of like to think of it as almost like a collagen lasagna, right? All the layers are going in the same direction. So why is this important? Okay. This helps to provide resistance to tension. But in a single direction. All right, so if you look at how these are arranged, okay, they're kind of arranged side to side. So these tissues are able to resist tension in those directions. So pulling on it this way or pulling on it this way, it would be able to compensate for that very easily because all of these are running in the same direction. Now, if we were to be pulled kind of this way or down this way, that's when we could run into some issues. So, places where this is found is going to be tendons and ligaments. So I'm sure either, unfortunately, you yourself have had a torn ligament, like an ACL or something, or you've heard of somebody who's torn an ACL. That is because they had resistance in the direction in which that tendon or ligament was not laid out tissue-wise, right? So that's why those can tear kind of easily, unfortunately. All right, our second is called dense irregular connective tissue. Okay, a little bit about this type of tissue. It has lots of collagen. So again, pretty strong, but with an irregular pattern. Okay, so what does this mean? It can go in all directions. Okay, and again, we'll kind of draw an example of a layout. So I can draw some collagen fibers kind of running every which way, right? Got some diagonal ones. I've got some maybe going side to side. One going up and down. Another diagonal guy. Just a little bit of everything going on, right? All different kinds of directions. And again, we've got those fibroblasts kind of sitting in between. Okay, so with the fibers being arranged this way instead of all stacked on top of each other going the same way, I can kind of pull or give resistance or tension in all kinds of directions, and this tissue should be able to withstand it fairly well. So we're going to write ourselves a note here that says, therefore, it can be pulled / sustain tension from many directions. Okay, so places where we can find dense irregular connective tissue. It's going to be the dermis of the skin. So your skin is nice and flexible. Organ and joint capsules. And ends of bones and cartilages. right, so once again, we have our two different types of dense connective tissue, dense regular and dense irregular, depending on how those fibers are kind of laid out within the tissue. All right, and there we have it. We have our examples of both types of connective tissue proper.